I had a good mixture of every type of exposure I can have. But I guess the moral of my story is even small exposure to the wrong stuff, if it's naturally in you already, is really hard to get away from it.
Yeah, man. And like during that time, 98 ish. I was still kind of in and out of the detention centers until I think what 99. But I like it's funny what P says when he says exposure just a little bit, right? Going back to alcohol, like my father is an alcoholic, and there's no nice way to put that. That motherfucker's a stone cold drunk. He's a functioning alcoholic, but an alcoholic nevertheless. And seeing him drink and drink and drink and drink when I was a kid, right? So to kind of try to tie all my shit together, right? I'm gonna just kind of quickly go back and say from being born, being in a toxic abusive, my mother being in a toxic abusive relationship with my father, then going to a homeless shelter, then going to live in the straight up slums, like worse than poor people slums, then moving to where regular poor people live, and then getting my mother buying a house in the hood amongst other poor people. My neighborhood's nickname was Section 8 because everyone was on Section 8. But
That was the difference between Delray and the projects. Projects is projects, public housing. To those who don't know, projects is public housing, which is government owned. Section 8 is houses that are privately owned but subsidized by the government, or the people who live there on benefits to get food stamps, welfare, and vouchers and stuff like that.
yeah, man. So I like just that a little bit of exposure to alcohol. It's straight up. I mean, that's all I needed to jumpstart whatever genetic predisposition I had, or it could have been again learned behavior. And yo, man, I remember trying to manipulate my way through school, but eventually I just stopped going. So I dropped out of school, and I got a GED, which at the time I was like, Psh, I don't give a fuck about no GED, but I think it was court ordered, so I had to go get it, if I'm not mistaken. And it's like I was still running the streets, still doing the same shit, man. And just the type of stuff that we saw and witnessed. Again, this whole episode is to kind of to show the contrast, as far as how we grew up and how a normal person. I'm not quite sure how to describe how a normal person grew up, but I know the shit we saw. Like, I mean, we're
Well,
talking
let,
dead
let, let me
bodies.
let me say this though, Dan. Like I said at the beginning of the show, a lot of this stuff may seem lost in translation. Like, like I keep saying, mine wasn't as me and Dan's experiences weren't the same, but we can, but I relate. You see what I'm saying? So a lot of this stuff has to do with the area and the era. So maybe I don't expect people who didn't grow up in the DC area, for example, highly congested areas is hyper violent to really understand how you can be influenced by an area. Just I, like I'm gonna give one example real quick. I didn't mean to interrupt. I remember having to go into DC frequently, right? And I remember back in the day, DC was so messed up. You thought that if you went to DC, you would get killed. That it was a great chance that you would get killed. That's how dangerous it was. Alexandria, I remember the helicopter with the searchlights all the time. So, I mean, we grew up around it. It was in us. So I may not have been in the same situations as Dan, but at the same time, I know of those same situations,
Yeah.
and that's just how it goes.
Man, I think a lot of people from places like Detroit, Chicago, Baltimore, a lot of them can relate to, because I want to say DC has a lot of cities that mirror it, or DC mirrors a lot of cities, however you want to look at it. But Chicago, Detroit, even like Akron,
Cleveland.
yeah, Cleveland, lots of cities, man. But to kind of to wrap up my, I guess my story, which is, like I just kind of recapped, but ended up kind of getting my shit together for the most part, But again, we still saw things like people dying, people getting
Yeah.
killed. We were always on high alert because everywhere you went, there was a chance of violence.